Okay, we have already discussed that why we need a special transport system like cardiovascular system in mammals, right? Very briefly, we talk about what are the functions of this cardiovascular system. Very briefly, we'll discuss in detail later, right? Because this lecture is just basics of cardiovascular system. So what could be the function of this cardiovascular system? You can see it is taking the oxygen from here, it is taking the nutrients from here and providing it to the peripheral cells. So we can say that one function is that cardiovascular system or this transport system is responsible for transport of nutrients. Transport of nutrients like glucose or amino acids or fatty acids, right? And of course like oxygen to the tissues. Secondly, not only it is transporting the needed substances to the peripheral cells, it is also removing the waste product. For example, it is taking carbon dioxide and taking it to the lungs back to get it back to the environment. Or it is taking some other metabolic waste and taking it to the kidney and getting it eliminated through the urine, right? So we can say the second function is that transport of metabolic waste. But what we will say, transport of nutrients and oxygen from gastrointestinal system and from lungs to the tissues, and transporting the metabolic waste from the tissues to the elimination surfaces, right? Those surfaces, those exchange surfaces which eliminate the waste products out of the body like kidneys or like carbon dioxide transported to the lungs to get it out, right? Then it has one more function. Yes, you know, blood has very special type of cells. We call them white blood cells. What we call them? White blood cells. These white blood cells, there are many types of them. We'll discuss it later. White blood cells fight with the infection. For example, if some bacteria enter here, there is some damage in the skin and some bacteria have come here, then blood will bring white blood cells here and white blood cells will go out and deal with these microorganisms. In the same way, so what we can say that it is responsible to transport the immune cells, immune system cells. So what it is doing, not only it is providing the cells where needed, nutrients and oxygen, not only it is removing the metabolic waste, but it is also doing one very important thing, that transport of immune cells like white blood cells to those areas where they are required, right? Any other function, can you tell me? Yes. Yes, another thing. Some substances are secreted by some cells. For example, in the pancreas, there are special type of cells which are insulin producing cells. We call them beta cells. They release insulin in blood. And then this insulin is taken to other cells where it can do its function. Such substances which are released by certain cells into blood and they act on distant cells, we call them hormones. Blood is also working as a transporter for the hormones or different enzymes or even antibodies within the body. For example, antibodies which fight with the infection, they may be produced in a lymph node, right? They are released in the blood, right? And those antibodies will be transported through the blood to those sites where they are needed, right? So what I'm saying, that they are also involved in the transport of, certain hormones, even proteins. Liver produces proteins, synthesizes and releases proteins in blood, and these proteins will go to many tissues, right? So specifically I should mention hormones, some enzymes, and like antibodies, which are the part of the immune system. Not immune cells, not only it circulatory system circulate the immune cells and transport where they are needed, even antibodies, which also help part of the immune system, they are also transported through the blood. And hormones or enzymes, which are substances which might be produced by one group of the cells, and some of these are released, and they are released into circulation, and through the circulation they are transported to another group of cells or where they are acting. So what we have seen up to now, that cardiovascular system not only transport the nutrients, not only transport the oxygen and carbon dioxide and other metabolic waste, it also transports the immune components like immune cells and antibodies. Even it transports those substances which are secreted by, released by one group of cells into blood, which act on other group of cells within the body like enzymes or hormones, right? Then any other function which cardiovascular system can have? Yes, cardiovascular system. Cardio means heart, which maintains the pressure. So cardiovascular system is responsible to maintain the pressure in the circulatory system, right? We call it maintaining blood pressure. Cardiovascular system is also responsible for maintenance of blood pressure, right? Yes. Then any other function comes in your mind? Cardiovascular system has some more functions like thermoregulation. Thermoregulation means temperature regulations. For example, in humans, if you go into very cold weather, what happens? Blood vessels which are coming to the near the skin, they will constrict, they will shrink, they will bring less blood to the surface so that body should not lose the heat. You are understanding what is happening? Cardiovascular system is also involved in thermoregulation. For example, in very cold weather, alteration in cardiovascular system is that vessels or blood vessels which are very near to the skin, they shrink, they constrict, and blood flow near the skin become very less, so you don't lose the body heat. Or when you are in very warm temperature, environmental temperature is very high, then what happens? Blood vessels on the near the surface of the skin, they dilate, right? They bring more blood on the surface, near the, not on the surface, in the skin or under the skin, so that more heat can be lost and body temperature does not go up. Again, I will say that cardiovascular system also has some role in thermoregulation, maintaining your core body temperature. If environment is very cold, superficial blood vessels which are very near to the skin, they will shrink so that less blood flow to the skin and less heat is lost from the skin. And if temperature is very high outside and it threatens to increase the core temperature of the body, blood vessels on the skin will dilate, and then what will happen? More blood will come to the skin and more heat will be lost, right? So we can say that it has one more function here, that it is involved in thermoregulation, right? Any other function comes in your mind? Yeah, sometimes cardiovascular system can help you to attract someone. You know, you have seen some girls blush when they see their beloved. Vessels dilate on the face. I will not give example of vessels dilating somewhere else, but anyway, on the face, blood vessels dilate. You know, there was a time girls used to blush. Now it's less often. So what they do? They put the blush on. Yes, they put the blush on. Okay, anyway, so this was the some of the functions of cardiovascular system. These are some of the functions of cardiovascular system. Okay, now let's go into a little detail of that. Okay, before we go into further detail of circulatory or types of circulatory system, let me talk about types of the vessels very briefly. You know, this lecture is just an introduction to the heart and circulation. I'm repeating again and again, this lecture is just basics, introduction, right? So all these things will be discussed in details later in other lectures, in the coming lectures. But right now we talk about that types of vessels. Now, let's suppose this is your pump. Hypothetically, I'm bringing this pump here. This is the pump. Pump is heart, right? Yes. And this is your circulatory system, a very simple circulatory system I'm making. Is that right? Now, let's suppose heart is pumping. These are the vessels which are bringing the blood to the heart. Those vessels which bring the blood to the heart, these vessels are like, yes, they are called veins. So what are veins? Veins are those vessels in the body where blood flows towards the heart, right? They are bringing blood towards the heart, right? And now these are the blood vessels. They are taking blood away from the heart, because of course if veins are bringing the blood to the heart, heart will squeeze the blood, pressurize the blood, and with pressure throw into outgoing vessels. These are veins are incoming vessels. Heart will receive the blood and squeeze the blood. When heart contracts, when heart power chambers contract, they will squeeze the blood and pressurize the blood and throw it into outgoing vessels under higher pressure. And these vessels will take the blood to the tissues. Let's suppose these are the other tissue cells. These cells are very happy. Why they are happy? Because they are having a very, very functional cardiovascular system. Now, these vessels which are taking the blood from the heart towards the tissue, these are called arteries. What are they called? Arteries. Right? So, what are arteries? Arteries are those vessels where, yes, where blood is flowing away from the heart towards the tissues. Away from the heart towards the tissues. And of course, blood there will be under higher pressure. Arteries should be having higher pressure. And if they are having higher pressure, their walls must be strong. Their walls must be strong. So arteries are usually, yes, again, I will repeat, arteries are those vessels which are taking blood from the heart towards the tissue under higher pressure, under relatively higher pressure, and they are thick-walled, they are relatively thick-walled and narrow lumen. Their lumen, this is lumen is narrow, right? This lumen is narrow, right? So this is basically artery. So if someone asks you what is artery, just tell that any vessel which is taking blood from the heart towards the peripheral tissue. That's it. That is artery. And what is vein? Vessels which collect the blood from the tissues and take it to the heart, right? So if this is my heart, the incoming vessels are veins, and outgoing vessels are arteries. Is that clear? Now, once the vessels, for example arteries, as they are moving away from the heart, they divide into smaller branches, right? What happens? That arteries divide into smaller branches, and let me show you this part of the arteries. This big artery is dividing into smaller branches, right? Now these major arteries, these are major arteries, they go into smaller arteries, and eventually they become very, very small. They become very, very small. Yes. Now look, there are major arteries. They divide into smaller arteries, and they divide into very small vessels which are called arterioles. What are they called? Arterioles. So what are these? Arterioles. Again, major arteries, yes. Then smaller arteries, and they divide into arterioles. Is that right? Now, these arterioles further divide. They further break down, and they, for example, I take one arteriole, this arteriole, they break down into many smaller vessels, and these vessels, yes, very thin walled. Remember, arterioles are having lot of muscles. They are having lot of muscles, smooth muscles, and these are circular muscles. Arterioles have lot of muscles, right? So when arterioles have so much smooth muscles, it means whenever their smooth muscle contracts, they can become very narrow, and whenever their smooth muscle relaxes, they become very wide. Arterioles have lot of smooth muscles, so they can constrict or they can relax. It means if they constrict, they offer the resistance to the blood flow. They offer the resistance to the blood flow, and if they offer the resistance to the blood flow, we also call them, arterioles are also called resistant vessels or resistance vessels. What are vessels? Resistance vessels. Advantage of this is, let's suppose these are two arterioles. This is one arteriole and this is another arteriole. Suppose some tissue is here. This is tissue A. This is not cell. Of course, there are many cells around, but, and this is, okay, we just talk about part of the tissue. Let's suppose this is some tissue. It is having two arterioles. This part is metabolically more active. It needs more blood supply. This part of the tissue, suppose, is less active, so it needs less blood supply. So what arterioles will do? It will constrict here and it will dilate here. So in this way, arterioles regulate the blood flow within the tissues and within the body, where to take more blood, where to take less blood. So arterioles play a role in redistribution of blood pattern. Is that right? Again, all those vessels which are taking the blood away from the heart, they are basically arterial system. Arterial system has major arteries which have lot of elastic tissue. They are also called elastic arteries. Then the smaller arteries, and eventually smaller arteries break down into very, very small arterioles which are very rich in smooth muscle, and they are resistance vessels. If they have to reduce the blood flow to some part of the tissue, they will constrict. If they have to increase the blood flow to some part of the tissue, they will dilate. Is that right? Yes. Now, from the arterioles will break down in thousands of very thin walled vessels which are called capillaries. Arterioles break down into very, very small vessels, and eventually the very thin walled vessels, these are called capillaries, right? These are called capillaries. Now, capillaries. Now, these capillaries, these are the cells, and you see, this is whole capillary bed. These are capillaries. These are capillaries. Now, what is the real difference between arterioles and capillaries? Very big difference. Arterioles are thick-walled. Do you think oxygen can go out of the arteriole to the tissues? No. Can glucose go out of the arteriole to the tissues? No. Actually, arterioles this arterial tree just bring the blood from the heart under pressure to the tissues, right? And eventually, arterioles break down into capillaries, which are very thin-walled. Because capillaries are very thin-walled, very thin, just one cell thick, right? Thin-walled, so very easily glucose can go out, oxygen can go out, other nutrients can go out to the tissues. They can diffuse out. Remember, blood is itself not going out. Blood is moving through the capillaries at a very low pressure and very slow pace. Blood is moving very slowly. And by simple diffusion or by simple mechanisms, substances from the blood in capillaries can move to the tissue cells. And waste products from the cells can go to the diffuse into capillaries. So basically, capillaries are what kind of vessels? What type of vessels? They are able to exchange the nutrients with the metabolic waste. They can give the nutrients and take the metabolic waste. Capillaries can give the oxygen and take carbon dioxide. So we call them exchange vessels. What we call them? Exchange vessels. It's so simple to understand. Is that right? This main artery or smaller artery or arterioles, they are not exchange vessels. They are just pipe which carry the blood away from the heart. But when these arterioles break down into millions of capillaries, blood in the capillaries flows very slowly. Why? Slow movement of the blood gives enough time to this blood to provide the nutrients to the cells and remove the waste product. Now there is one question. Why blood flow here becomes so slow? Here it was under high pressure. As blood is moving from the heart, it comes into arterial system, it comes under high pressure. As blood moves forward, and especially when it comes into capillaries, the pressure of the blood decreases and velocity of blood, the speed with which blood is moving in capillary also drops. I mean, blood comes jumping and running from here, and here it starts a little catwalk. Where it is doing catwalk? In the capillaries. Why it is doing so slow and stylishly? So that if there is some chances of exchanges between the component of the blood and the tissue fluid, that should be done, right? Because from the capillary, if substance has to go to the cell, first of all, this will go out. Suppose this is the cell which is going to receive the glucose. First it was in blood, then this glucose will come out of the blood into fluid around the cell. Second position, and eventually it will shift to the cell. Here it is in position number 1 is in blood. Position number 2 is that it has diffused from the blood or moved from the blood into fluid around the cells. This fluid is called interstitial fluid. Interstitial fluid. And from the interstitial fluid, it will be taken by the cells. In the same way, oxygen from the capillaries, blood is moving slowly, right? If the cells are using oxygen rapidly, cells are low in oxygen, they will pull the oxygen from interstitial fluid. Interstitial fluid will become low in oxygen, and that will pull the oxygen from capillaries into interstitial fluid. In the same way, metabolic waste, cells are producing more metabolic waste, so they will move into where? Interstitial fluid, and from there it will move into blood. But this exchange can occur only in capillaries. There are many types of capillaries, but just believe me that what are capillaries? Capillaries are exchange vessels. But I was telling that when blood is coming through the arteries, it is come jumping and running under high pressure. And here it starts catwalk. It becomes slow. We understand why it should be slow, so that exchanges can go on. But the question is, what makes it slow? When it was coming very, what? Great pressure and with high velocity. It was coming under high velocity, high speed. Here it becomes very slow. Why it becomes slow? Who will tell me?
Elasticity?
Yes?
Fenestration?
No.
Elasticity?
No.
Is it the cross-section area?
Yes! He is saying it has something to do with the cross section. But let me explain the other guys and gals what you are trying to say. Let me tell you. Let's suppose this is an artery. This is an artery and this is the cross section of this artery, right? This is the lumen of this artery. Or we can say this is a cross section. Now blood is moving through this area. When it goes into arterioles, suppose these are the two arterioles, right? From the arterioles it goes into capillaries. Now look at it. One capillary, second capillary, third capillary, fourth capillary, right? Here again another capillary, and yet another capillary, and yet another capillary. Now look at it. Here blood was only in this area. The cross section was, blood was here. Because it is just like a narrow river. When river is narrow, water moves slow or fast? Fast. And if river becomes very wide, the water will move slow. Similar here. It is narrow area, so blood will under high pressure will move very fast. But when it reaches here, it divides in so many thousands of capillaries. Thousands of capillaries. So what happened? The total surface areas of all these capillaries very high. Let's suppose we bring these all capillaries here, here. So this is cross section of this capillary. Okay, we bring the, add this cross sections of all these capillaries. For a single capillary, its cross section area of the lumen is much smaller than the artery. For a single capillary, the lumen of single capillary cross section is much smaller than the arterial cross section. But because from one arterial system millions of capillaries come, if you add all cross sections, right? If you add all cross sections together, so these are how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I will show 8. Yes. Now this is the total cross-sectional area of capillaries, and this was the total cross-section area of the artery. So what we have seen, that as blood moves into from the heart, even though it goes into smaller vessels, but number of smaller vessels is so much that total cross-sectional area from major arteries to the capillaries keep on increasing, right? So this cross-sectional area which was little here has become so much. Let me make it again. That yes, I'm making capillaries and their cross-sectional areas. Now you see, blood is total cross-sectional area combined of the capillaries which are derived from one artery. Total cross-sectional area of all the capillaries which are derived from or receiving the blood from one artery. Here cross-sectional area is more than feeding artery. So what will happen? Pressure should go up or down? Pressure should go down. Right? If we talk about single artery, again I will repeat, there is a little paradox. If we talk about single artery is of course much larger as compared to the single capillary. But because one artery divides into millions of capillaries, the total cross-sectional area of the lumen of capillaries combined is far more than the total cross-sectional area of the feeding artery. So blood flow becomes slow. Not only it loses pressure, but it also becomes slow. So we can say here the the river was narrow and it divides into so many small rivulets, right? So many millions of the rivulets that it becomes very slow. Is that clear?
Yes.
So we can say arterial system is usually relatively high pressure system and it drains into capillaries where there is pressure low. And arterial system is a high velocity system, high speed system, and in the capillaries flow is low. So arteries are mainly, what is happening, just bringing the blood from the heart to the tissues, where arteries break down into smaller arterioles into eventually capillaries, and these are the capillaries which do the real exchange. These are the capillaries which do the real exchange of nutrients and metabolic waste. Now, these capillaries come together. These capillaries come together and they drain into, yes, another group of vessels, and these small vessels are now collecting the blood from capillaries. This vessel and this vessel, these vessels are collecting the blood from capillaries. These are collectors. These were feeders, providers. They were bringing the blood. They're collecting, and these collecting vessels, right, they also fuse with each other. And yes, these vessels in which capillaries are draining, if I am the capillary, if I'm the capillary, I'm receiving the blood from which side? Arterial side. And I'm draining into venous side. This is venous side, because it is now taking the blood towards the heart. Circulatory system, circle, right? So in this circle, what is happening? Circle is starting from the heart, in this example, right? Heart is pressurizing the blood, pushing into arteries, which are high pressure system, high velocity system. As arteries break down into smaller arteries, into arterioles, and eventually millions of capillaries, pressure and velocity both drop. And capillaries are very thin, exchanges occur, right? So, and then from blood from the capillaries, which has lost some oxygen and gained some carbon dioxide, lost some nutrients and gained some metabolic waste, right? These capillaries are connected to the collecting system, which will take the blood back to the heart. It means these capillaries on the other end, on the draining end, they are connected with the veins. They are connected with the veins. Now, here what we can see, as we say, these are arteries, big arteries, then into smaller arteries, and then arterioles, then capillaries. Now reverse will occur. Here first blood from capillaries is taken into smaller veins. Very small veins are called venules. What are the spellings of venules? I cannot hear it. V. Okay, let's hope you are right. Otherwise, correct yourself from Google or something like that. Venules. Okay. Thanks God you are awake. Okay. Venules. So what we can say, blood from the capillaries is collected into venules. Venules join together and make small veins, then large veins, and later on we'll see very large veins which are called vena cava, which will drain the blood or bring back the blood to heart. So this is the basic design of circulatory system. We'll discuss in detail later on. There is single circulation, there is double circulation, and we'll also talk about open circulation and closed circulation. That is for the later lecture. Right now I just wanted to tell you the basic concept about vessels. Again, if I'm the heart, I'm taking the blood to the tissues. So what is this? Artery. And from here I'm bringing the blood to the heart. What is this? Veins. And these are capillaries. It means capillaries on one end are connected with the arterial system from where they are receiving the blood, and capillaries on other end are connected with the venous system where they are draining. We can say capillaries are very thin walled exchange vessels which are interposed between the arterioles and venules. Arterioles acting as their feeder and venules acting as their drainage system. Right? Any question up to this? Just I want to understand. Yes. Yes, you have a question.
Sir, is there any artery that brings blood to the heart?
Okay, he is saying there's any artery which brings the blood to the heart. Very good question. Listen. The question is, when I say arteries are taking away blood from the heart, I mean that arteries are taking the blood away from the chambers of the heart. From the chambers of the heart towards the tissue. Towards the tissue. And when I say veins are taking blood to the heart, it means they are taking blood from the tissues, collecting from there and draining it back and bringing it to heart so that heart can again pressurize. Because when your question was, is there any artery which brings the blood to the heart? No. There are arteries which bring the blood to the wall of the heart. There's a difference. Okay, now let me put this as a heart. Let's suppose this is your heart, 4 chambers. Now these are the walls of the heart. Ventricles are very thick walled. These are what? Walls of the heart, right? Now, anything which is bringing the blood into heart is vein. Anything which is taking the blood out of the heart is artery. But if there is a vessel which branch from the artery, let's suppose there is an artery which is going out, and this artery, let's suppose I show that there is an artery going from here to the tissues, right? But from this artery, if there is a branch which is taking the blood to the wall of the heart, right, we'll still say this is taking blood from the heart towards the wall of the heart, right? This is called coronary artery. This is called coronary artery. What are coronary artery? Coronary arteries are those arteries which are bringing the blood from major artery coming out of the heart. Heart pump the blood into major artery which is called aorta. We will discuss this in coming lectures. We will discuss this in coming lectures. When heart pump, right, especially in human beings, if I'm talking about left heart, left ventricle, it pumps the blood. We'll discuss in detail in later lecture, right? It brings the blood into aorta. From the aorta, some smaller vessels come to the heart, especially 2. Those 2 which bring to the heart, to be more accurately, bring the blood to the wall of the heart, right, to provide the nutrition to the wall of the heart, because wall of the heart which is contracting requires a lot of oxygen and nutrients. Those are called coronary artery. But for practical purposes, for right now, you just remember that if I'm the heart, this is what? Major, if it is taking the blood away, what is this? Arterial system. Arterial system, major arteries, smaller arteries, arterioles, and then capillaries connected to arterioles. And this is the collection system which is bringing the blood back to the heart. Yes, capillaries connected to the venules, smaller veins, larger veins, back to the heart. Is that right? Now, I will just see you have understood or not that if this is heart, this is heart. This blood vessel is taking the blood out of the heart to the tissues. What is this? Major artery. Divide into smaller arteries. divide into very small arterioles, divide into capillaries which are exchange vessels, right?
Yes.
And then capillaries, now they are not dividing, they are fusing together, they are uniting together making venules, and venules unite together to make small veins, then larger veins, and back to the heart, and circulation. Is that right?
Yes.
So let's have a break.